Spring 1978, Kansas City, Missouri. FBI agents crept into the Villa Capri restaurant after closing time. They carried electronic equipment, microphones, transmitters, batteries, small enough to hide, sensitive enough to pick up conversations from across the room. The agents knew exactly where to plant them, the back table, the one reserved every night for Kansas City mob boss Nick Savella and his associates. That table was where business happened, where orders were given, where money changed hands. The FBI planted their bugs and left before sunrise. Nobody noticed. The next night, Nick Savella sat at his usual table. He talked freely about murders, about casino operations, about problems with their Vegas operations. The FBI listened, and what they heard had nothing to do with the murders they were investigating. They heard something bigger, much bigger. They heard mob bosses from 4 cities, Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland, conspiring to steal millions from Las Vegas casinos. This is the story of Operation Strawman, how the FBI bugged 2 mob restaurants, one in Kansas City, one in Milwaukee, how those bugs recorded thousands of hours of conversations, and how 15 mob bosses across the Midwest went to prison for decades based on what the FBI heard at restaurant tables. The mob thought they were untouchable. They ran their businesses from their favorite restaurants for years, until the FBI learned how to listen. The setup, how the mob owned Las Vegas. 1974, Las Vegas, Nevada. The mob had a problem. How do you own a casino when Nevada law says mob figures can't hold gambling licenses? They'd solved this problem years earlier with a simple system. Frontmen. Find someone with a clean record. Give them money to buy a casino, usually millions from the Teamsters Union pension fund. Put them on paper as the owner. But the mob controlled everything. They placed their people in key positions. They made the decisions. They took the profits. And most importantly, they skimmed. Skimming was the bloodline of mob casino operations. Every night, before the official count, trusted operatives removed cash from the counting rooms, thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands. The money never appeared on official books, never got taxed by Nevada, never reported to the IRS. It went straight to the mob bosses in Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. Alan Glick was the perfect frontman. Glick was 32 years old, Vietnam veteran, real estate developer from San Diego. Clean record, no mob connections, on paper. In 1974, Glick bought the Stardust and Fremont casinos in Las Vegas. The purchase price, $62.7 million. He borrowed the money from the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, the same fund that had been financing mob operations for decades. But Glick wasn't really in charge. Frank Lefty Rosenthal ran the casinos for the mob. Rosenthal was brilliant with numbers, a professional sports handicapper from Chicago with deep mob connections. He couldn't get a gaming license because his mob ties were too obvious. So his official title was Entertainment Director. But everyone knew he ran the operations. And Rosenthal reported to the bosses, Nick Savella in Kansas City, Joey Aiuppa in Chicago, Frank Balistrieri in Milwaukee, Milton Rockman in Cleveland. These men controlled the skim. They decided how much came out. They divided the profits. From 1974 to 1978, over $2 million was skimmed from the Stardust Casino alone. The FBI suspected this was happening, but they couldn't prove it. Then they got lucky.
The Kansas City bug, when a murder investigation found something bigger. 1978, Kansas City FBI office. Special Agent Bill Owsley ran the organized crime squad. His team was investigating a string of local murders, multiple victims, all connected to the Kansas City mob. Owsley knew Nick Savella, boss of the Kansas City crime family, was involved, but proving it required evidence. Owsley's team decided to plant the bug. The target, Villa Capri Restaurant in northeast Kansas City, a mob hangout. Savella ate there constantly, always at the same back table. Spring 1978, FBI agents executed their plan. They entered Villa Capri after hours, planted microphones at the back table where Savella sat, installed transmitters, set up receivers nearby. The next night, they started listening. Nick Savella sat at his table with his brother Carl Savella and other associates. They talked freely, thinking they were safe in their regular spot. The FBI agents put on their headphones, expecting to hear about the murders. Instead, they heard something else. Las Vegas was the last thing on our minds, Bill Owsley later recalled. But when they sat down that night, they talked about Las Vegas. Savella and his associates discussed casino operations, skimming money, problems with Frank Rosenthal, frustrations with how Las Vegas was being run. The FBI agents looked at each other. They'd stumbled onto something much bigger than murder. The Milwaukee connection, Mr. Big at his table. 1960s through early 1980s, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Frank Balistreri ran the Milwaukee mob from a table at Snug's restaurant. Snug's was located in the Shorecrest Hotel on the east side. Nothing fancy, just a neighborhood restaurant. But it was Balistreri's office. Every day, Frankie Bow sat at his back table. Associates came to him. They discussed business, gambling operations, loan sharking, vending machine rackets, and their cut from the Las Vegas casinos. Balistreri had become boss of the Milwaukee family in 1961 after his father-in-law, John Aliotta, retired. By the late 1970s, Balistreri controlled illegal gambling across Wisconsin. He had a monopoly on sports betting. He dominated the vending machine business. And he had a piece of the Vegas skim. Balistreri had helped arrange the Teamsters loan for Alan Glick, $62.7 million to buy the Stardust and Fremont. In return, Balistreri got a cut of the skim. His sons worked with him, Joseph and John Balistreri, both lawyers. They handled the business side, kept things looking legitimate. The FBI had been watching Balistreri for years. They knew he was running criminal operations, but proving it was hard. Then, in 1978, they made their move. The FBI planted bugs at Snug's restaurant, at Balistreri's back table. They also wiretapped the Shorecrest Hotel, owned by Joseph Balistreri. Suddenly, the FBI could hear everything. Balistreri's conversations with his sons, discussions about their vending machine extortion racket, arguments about money from Las Vegas. One recorded conversation from February 1980 became legendary. John Balistreri talked to his mother about the IRS. 3 years ago, we ran a bunch of strip clubs and none of them was successful. Today, we're worth $15 million, and you think that sticks in their throat? The family couldn't explain their sudden wealth. The IRS know it, the FBI know it, and now they had it on tape. The sting. Donnie Brasco comes to Milwaukee. 1978. New York City. FBI agent Joseph Pistone was deep undercover as Donnie Brasco, a jewel thief who'd infiltrated the Bonanno crime family. Pistone had spent 5 years building his cover. He'd become friends with wise guys, participated in criminal activity,
earned their trust. The FBI decided to use Pistone's credibility for another operation, Milwaukee. The plan was simple. Pistone would introduce an undercover agent working as Tony Conti to Frank Balistreri's operation. Conti would set up a vending machine company. Balistreri would try to extort him, and the FBI would catch it all. On tape. Pistone flew to Milwaukee. He vouched for Tony Conti to Balistreri's crew, said Conti was connected, trustworthy, good for business. The Milwaukee mob took the bait. Conti set up his vending machine company. Balistreri's people approached him, told him he needed to pay a street tax, protection money, to operate in Milwaukee. He refused. Balistreri's associates became more aggressive. They threatened them, made it clear, pay up or face consequences. The FBI recorded everything. On April 10, 1984, Frank Balistreri and his two sons were convicted of extortion for trying to take control of the FBI's dummy vending machine company. Frank got 13 years. Joseph and John each got 8 years, later reduced to 5. But that was just the beginning.
Operation Strawman, connecting all the pieces. While the Milwaukee vending machine case proceeded, something bigger was developing. The FBI bugs in Kansas City and Milwaukee had captured thousands of hours of conversations about the Las Vegas skim. The Justice Department's organized crime strike force coordinated with FBI officers across multiple states: Kansas City, Milwaukee, Chicago, Cleveland, Las Vegas. They called it Operation Strawman, named after the frontmen like Alan Glick, who pretended to own the casinos while the mob ran everything behind the scenes. The investigation revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Nick Savella in Kansas City coordinated with Joey Aiuppa in Chicago, the top boss of the Chicago outfit. Frank Balistreri in Milwaukee got his cut. Milton Rockman in Cleveland represented his family's interests. They all answered to one man in Las Vegas, Joe Agosto. Agosto was the entertainment director of the Tropicana Hotel and Casino. He ran the Foley's Bergère show, the famous Showgirl Review. But Agosto's real job was overseeing the skim. He controlled how money came out of the counting rooms at the Tropicana. He ensured cash went to Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. He kept the books. Called the Luna, the number 2 man in Kansas City kept meticulous records of who got what, every dollar accounted for. Those records would destroy them. The FBI compiled evidence from multiple sources. Thousands of hours of wiretapped restaurant conversations, called the Luna's detailed financial records, testimony from informants, physical surveillance of cash couriers, bank records showing suspicious transactions, the Nevada Gaming Control Board investigations. By 1983, they were ready to move. The indictments, when the hammer fell. September 1983, federal grand jury. 15 major crime figures were indicted for conspiring to skim over $2 million from the Stardust and Fremont casinos. The defendants included, from Chicago, Joey Aiuppa, 75 years old, boss of the Chicago outfit. Jackie Cerrone, 69, underboss. Angelo LaPietra, 62, a capo. Tony Spilatro, 45, the mob's enforcer in Las Vegas. Joseph Lombardo, 54, a high-ranking member. From Milwaukee, Frank Balistreri, 65, the boss. Joseph Balistreri, 43, his lawyer's son. John Balistreri, 34, his other lawyer's son, the family's business manager. From Kansas City,
called Costra, 72, the boss. Called the Luna, 55, the underboss. Peter Tamburello, 51, a soldier. From Cleveland, Milton Rockman, 75, the mob's representative. From Las Vegas, Carl Thomas, 51, a casino operator who facilitated the skim. These weren't street thugs. These were the top bosses and underbosses of 4 major crime families, the leadership of organized crime across the Midwest. Some observers called it the most significant organized crime prosecution in Justice Department history. The charges were serious: conspiracy to skim casino profits, interstate transportation of stolen property, racketeering. If convicted on all counts, each defendant faced up to 40 years in prison and $80,000 in fines. The mob had operated with near impunity for decades. Now, their entire leadership was facing prison, and it all came from conversations at restaurant tables.
The trial, 4 months in Kansas City, September 23, 1985. United States District Court, Kansas City. 9 defendants sat in the courtroom. Some had pleaded guilty or been severed from the main trial. Others were still fighting. Judge Joseph Stevens, Jr. presided. The trial lasted 4 months. Chief Prosecutor David Helfrey led the Justice Department's organized crime strike force. His team presented overwhelming evidence: 1,000 documents, over 30 hours of secretly recorded telephone conversations and bugs, testimony from 400 witnesses, mostly FBI agents and police authenticating wiretaps and records. Called the Luna's meticulous financial records showing exactly how the skim money was divided. The wiretap conversations from the Kansas City and Milwaukee restaurants were particularly damning. Jurors heard Nick Savella discussing Vegas operations, Frank Balistieri arguing about his cut, associates complaining about Frank Rosenthal's management of the Stardust. The recordings captured the mob bosses in their own words discussing their criminal enterprise. Some recordings were almost comical. The FBI played tapes of Frank, Joe, and John Balistieri trying to figure out how to explain $200,000 in cash the FBI had seized from the Shorecrest Hotel. The defense argued the government's case was based on circumstantial evidence and flawed interpretations of casual conversations. But the evidence was overwhelming. January 1986, the jury reached its verdict. 5 defendants were convicted: Joey Aiuppa, Jackie Cherone, Frank Balistieri, Angelo LaPietra, and Carl DeLuna. The others were either acquitted or had already pleaded guilty to lesser charges. The convictions were major victories, but the sentences were even more significant. Joey Aiuppa, 28 years in prison. The 77-year-old boss to the Chicago outfit would die in prison. Jackie Cherone, 28 years. The Chicago underboss, age 71, also died while incarcerated. Frank Balistieri, 10 years to run concurrently with his previous 13-year sentence for the vending machine extortion. He served 7 years total and was released in 1991. He died in 1993, 2 years after release. The other defendants received similar sentences, decades in federal prison. But the impact went far beyond these 5 convictions. The Tropicana case, the other half of Strawman. While the Stardust case proceeded, the FBI had been building a parallel case. The Tropicana Hotel and Casino was also being skimmed. Joe Agosto controlled that operation. In 1981, a Kansas City grand jury indicted Agosto, Nick Savella, Carl DeLuna, and Carl Thomas for skimming $280,000 from the Tropicana. The defendants went to trial in 1983. All were convicted. Nick Savella, the boss of Kansas City, died of cancer in 1983, just after his conviction. He never served his prison sentence. But the Tropicana convictions, combined with the Stardust convictions, effectively destroyed the Kansas City mob.
In total, Operation Strawman resulted in 19 convictions of senior mobsters across 4 crime families: Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. The investigation virtually eliminated the leadership of organized crime across the Midwest. The aftermath: how Strawman changed everything. The impact of Operation Strawman went far beyond the convictions. First, it broke the mob's control of Las Vegas. Alan Glick, the frontman who'd bought the Stardust, was forced out by Nevada gaming officials. The Stardust and other mob-connected casinos were sold to religious owners. The skimming operations that had funneled millions to mob families for decades were finished. Second, it demonstrated the power of electronic surveillance. The bugs planted at Villa Capri in Kansas City and Snugs in Milwaukee captured thousands of hours of incriminating conversations. The wiretaps on hotels and businesses provided additional evidence. This was the first time the FBI had so successfully used long-term electronic surveillance to dismantle multiple organized crime families simultaneously. The Strawman investigation became the model for future RICO cases. Third, it proved that mob bosses could be prosecuted. For decades, the top bosses had insulated themselves from prosecution. They gave orders indirectly, they never got their hands dirty, they maintained plausible deniability. But the bugs captured them speaking freely, planning crimes, discussing the skim, dividing profits. Their own voices convicted them. Fourth, it ended an era. The mob families that controlled the Midwest for decades were gutted. The Kansas City family never recovered. After Nick Savella's death and the Strawman convictions, the family essentially ceased to exist as an independent organization. The Chicago outfit survived, but diminished. Joey Iupa and Jackie Chirone, their top leaders, died in prison. The outfit never regained its Las Vegas operations. The Milwaukee family was absorbed by Chicago after Frank Balistieri's death in 1993. It no longer exists as an independent organization. The Cleveland family faced similar prosecution and decline. Operation Strawman, more than any other case, broke the back of Midwest organized crime.
The irony, when safe spaces became traps. For decades, mob bosses conducted business in restaurants. It made sense. Restaurants were public spaces. Hard to prove anything criminal was happening. They were social. Eating together looked innocent. They provided privacy, a back table away from other diners. Nick Savella felt safe at Villa Capri. He went there every night, always sat at the same table, discussed business freely. Frank Balistieri felt safe at Snugs. It was his office, his territory. He'd been conducting business from that back table for years without problems. These restaurants were where they felt most comfortable, most in control. That comfort made them careless. They spoke openly, discussed specific dollar amounts, named names, detailed exactly how the skim worked. They never imagined the FBI was listening. The bugs were small, invisible. The technology was sophisticated enough to pick up conversations across the room. By the time the mob bosses realized they'd been compromised, it was too late. Thousands of hours recorded, evidence enough to convict dozens of people. The places where they felt safest became the evidence that destroyed them. The lesson: why the mob lost Vegas. The mob controlled Las Vegas for over 30 years. They built the casinos, they ran the operations, they skimmed millions in untaxed profits. But they lost it all because they couldn't adapt. First, they relied on old methods: restaurant meetings, in-person conversations, face-to-face business. The FBI adapted faster. They developed electronic surveillance technology. They learned how to bug restaurants without being detected. They built cases using the mob's own words against them. Second, the mob couldn't operate legally. Once Nevada started enforcing gaming regulations, banning known mobsters, investigating casino ownership, auditing finances, the mob couldn't compete. They needed frontmen, hidden ownership, skimming operations, all of which created vulnerabilities. Frontmen who could flip, financial records that could be subpoenaed, evidence trails that investigators could follow. And third, the mob attracted law enforcement attention. The FBI dedicated enormous resources to Operation Strawman, multiple field offices, years of surveillance, coordination with the Justice Department's organized crime strike force. Why? Because taking down mob control of Vegas was a priority. The mob's infiltration of legitimate businesses, casinos, unions, even pension funds threatened the entire Nevada economy. Once law enforcement committed to ending mob control, it was only a matter of time. And fourth, the mob's own structure betrayed them. They kept detailed records, like Carl DeLuna's meticulous book showing who got what from the skim. They held regular meetings, making it easy for the FBI to know where and when to plant bugs. They trusted too many people, creating opportunities for informants and flipped associates. The very things that made the mob successful, organization, record keeping, hierarchy, became the tools that destroyed them.
Operation Strawman stands as one of the most successful organized crime investigations in FBI history. 2 restaurant bugs, one in Kansas City at Villa Capri, one in Milwaukee at Snugs, captured thousands of hours of mob conversations. Those conversations revealed a massive conspiracy to skim over $2 million from Las Vegas casinos. 19 senior mobsters were convicted. The leadership of 4 crime families was destroyed. The mob's control of Las Vegas ended. All because the FBI learned to listen. Nick Savella thought his back table at Villa Capri was safe. Frank Balistrieri thought his table at Snugs was secure. They were wrong. The FBI proved that in the modern age, there's no such thing as a safe space for criminals. Not when technology allows law enforcement to hear everything. The mob bosses spent decades building their Vegas empire. They perfected the skim. They made millions. But they lost it all because they talked too freely at their favorite restaurants. If you want to understand how the FBI dismantled organized crime's control of Las Vegas, how electronic surveillance revolutionized law enforcement, Operation Strawman is where you start, because it proves a simple truth. Your safe space is only safe until someone's listening. And in 1978, when the FBI planted bugs at 2 mob restaurants, the Midwest Mafia's days were numbered. They just didn't know it yet.